Hello, my name is Smirnov. I'm working at UTS, where I'm teaching Gen AI in research for our HDR students. And because there was a lot of interest to this topic, I decided to talk a bit about it with you. I'm usually doing like pure research presentations, so it's a bit new environment for me. So I'm sorry if I missed the mark. So what I think is that today there's like clearly no lack of educational resources about Gen AI, and some of them fall in this category of what I call tips, tricks, and tutorials. So this is actually like a real text from a real LinkedIn post when someone was saying, PhD students, just use my prompt and you will be able to do any type of literature review just in 10 minutes. And I think this is like overpromising, but not all of this advice are useless. So there's many useful resources like this. And on the other end of spectrum, we have kind of technical content, and usually you're required to have like some sort of computer science background to be able to understand this. And personally, I feel like when we're thinking about HDR students, we actually need something in between. So I feel like there is a gap between these two approaches, and we need to fill it. Because I think what we need to do, we need to have something that would be accessible to all HDR students, regardless of their background. We shouldn't like require everyone to become computer scientists. At the same time, we shouldn't like oversimplify things. They should still get some kind of higher level conceptual understanding of how these technologies work. And we also want this to be based not on anecdotes, but based on evidence, and also be related to like actual practice. I was teaching this course. We started with hybrid session, and then we realized that actually people prefer to have purely online or to purely in person. So it was transformed in a self-paced online course and two in-person sessions. It consists of two or four parts. So first, I'm talking about these technologies, trying to provide HDR students with kind of conceptual understanding of how this works. Then we talk about strengths and weaknesses of generative AI. Then we cover specific use cases in research, and that start from generating your idea, and then moving to data analysis, preparing presentation. At the end we discuss ethics. That's an important block. So it's like a whole separate section just on discussing ethical applications. And now I want to provide you with some specific examples. So it's not just abstract words. So let's look at the example of large language models. So I think one approach is what we just heard in the previous talk. You usually just say, if you don't have time, you just say that LLMs is just about kind of pattern recognition, next word prediction, which is good when you don't have time, but that's probably not enough to get understanding of how they actually work. And on the other hand, you have this kind of technical explanation, what transformer it is. So people teach you word embeddings, gradient descent, all these technical terms. And that's probably not everyone have time to do this. So I was trying to find something in between. And for example, for large language models, my idea was just to use a book example. So actually you can create a language model just using a book. You actually can even do it like by hand without a math. And the idea is that you start with a certain like beginning of a sentence that can be your prompt, and then you go to a book and you just highlight all like words that you have here. You see had been, and then you select what's going after these words. So in this case, it's like happy, cut off, and you go through the whole book and you see what word is the most common after that, and you put this word here, and then you continue like that, and you will generate some sentences. And I think this is more useful than just explaining that LLMs are next word prediction, pattern recognition, because it can give you conceptual understanding of some phenomena. For example, one question that I often asked about Gen AI, people saying like, can Gen AI produce something original? Like in what sense original? And if you just know that it's about pattern recognition, next word prediction, it's kind of not clear what's actually happening. But when you use our book example, it's very simple. It doesn't require you to do any math, but students can see how we created a completely new sentence that was grammatically correct, proper English sentence. it's never occurred in the book itself. So it was like something completely new, but it also relied heavily on the content of a book because we were just actually using the words from the book. And they have this kind of feeling and understanding what it means to be original. And and conceptually, this is working exactly the same as large language models. So there's no conceptual difference between them. They're just much more complicated, but they're working in the same way. And another example that I have is like with role prompting. So there's also a very common advice that I see in some learning materials. They say it's useful to assign a role to your chatbot. So you start your prompt by saying you're an expert Python developer if you want your model to help you with programming. And so I don't want to give this advice based on anecdotal evidence. So instead, what we are doing in my course, we're discussing actual research papers. And there was a research paper when authors, they just systematically check a lot of different roles. So this is all different roles that they checked. And they compared it with the baseline, no prompt at all. And they have found actually that all roles decrease performance of a model. And so now we can see that, yeah, maybe that's not so good advice because there was research showing that it's not working. And actually, there was another research that was showing that it could actually induce toxic answers from LLM when you are assigning them a certain role. And here's like an important part of this research. This is a probability of chatbot returning you a response that is toxic. And they discovered that quite obviously, if you say you are a terrible person, then chatbot would be answering you something bad. But remarkably, even if you tell it that you are a good person or normal person, then probability of toxic response would be higher than if it's not persona at all. And I think for HDR, it's like really suited this kind of format when you just discuss actual research papers. And also you don't need to get any computer science background to understand how this experiment was conducted, to understand and interpret its result. And the same also goes for ethic, because I think like one thing is just to know that, their models are biased. I think a lot of people discuss that models are biased, but another to realize what it actually means. And there was, I think, a very clever research with a very interesting design. What researchers asked, they asked these questions to LLM. In the sentence, the doctor phoned the nurse because she was late. Who was late? And if you think about it, that's actually ambiguous, right? She can be related to a doctor and to a nurse. And unfortunately, human would often assume that she is a nurse because they would think that the doctor probably would be more likely he. So we have this bias in humans, and researchers was investigating if large language models, chatbots have the same bias. They also asked these questions in different forms just to ensure that everything is symmetrical. And what they have found out that indeed these chatbots also answer stereotypically. So they would answer that nurse, it is she, and doctor is he, even if there's like no reason to believe that it is the case. And I think the best sort of evidence is evidence that can be, you produced on your own. That's why I also like to add some like interactive experiments. We have something related to ethics, and this was experiment related to how well you can actually detect generative AI or not. And, if you just know that it can create something very good, it's one thing, but if you actually make a mistake, then it's a very different experience. So I ask students which of these images is more likely humanly generated, and this is answer from one of the sessions that I was teaching. That was like a small session, and so you see that many people kind of show that this image is human generated, but this actually AI generated image. Actually, the only human generated image is this sheep. Everything else is generated by Gen AI. And we can see that, I was able to fool participants, and the same also true with photographs. Yeah, also here was the same question, and it's interesting that, a lot of people think that this is like for sure human generated image. And I have reverse questions when I ask what image is AI generated. No one selected this image, but this is actually AI generated image. This is also AI generated image, and this is AI generated image. So in this case, we kind of also explore an evidence-based approach, but based on data that generated by ourselves. Yeah, and I don't want to spend the whole time because I think it would be more interesting maybe to answer to questions. So that's why it's actually all that I wanted to share with you, and I would be happy. I think I have some time, so I would be happy to discuss this.
Thanks very much, Ivan. And I appreciate, so if anyone does have any further questions, please add them into the Q&A. We've just got one there that may have flowed over from our last presenter, but I think it applies to some of what you were talking about too in terms of the stereotypical answers that AI can provide. And it's from Alyssa. So Alyssa has asked, how do we ensure that local/Indigenous knowledges and ways of being aren't either steamrolled by AI or curated and sold back to us for profit? For example, various mita/dialects of Tireo, and apologies for my pronunciation, Tireo Mori are often forgotten in favour of a standardised Tireo that is taught in the NZ curriculum.
Yeah, for me, it's maybe, yeah, I think it was for previous speaker, but what, so again, my approach, I generally try, we have like a huge session of ethics. And at the very beginning, I'm saying that I wouldn't like provide any answers, but because I think like ethics is about actually making, conscious decision, but my idea is just to show what is happening. And there's actually interesting study, I think that's, so there's this survey that's called World Value Service, and then that's conducted in many countries. And so we know how people in different countries answer on questions. Example of questions is like, what you would prefer, strong democracy or strong economy? And then researchers was asking the same questions to LLM, and they discovered that their values is kind of very closely aligned to answers of people from US. So this also shows that they actually have kind of some value statements, and it's not reflecting global population. What is also interesting that LLMs actually have stereotypes about stereotypes. So they also ask them like think as you are Russian, what you would answer on this question. And the answer, like for some of the question, the answer is much more conservative than actual answers from Russian. Like it was the same for Russian and American for some question, but the model immediately assumes that kind of Russians are very conservative. So I think it's like very, it's not directly answering this question, but this is like really true that they, like a lot of bird population just not represented. And then I think it's like really, it's a really important issue. Maybe what could happen here is that on the positive side, I think there's this phenomenon of glocalization. When you have something that's, like I think like there was this Armenian musical, like Armenian, I don't know how it's called in English, duduk. So it's like Armenian instrument, and then it was like kind of very local, and it can even like disappear. But then for some reason it was picked up by composers and become like used in like Hollywood movies, and then suddenly was kind of revived. So maybe, yeah, there is chance to preserve something via LLMs, but I'm not seeing it's now happening. But maybe we can have some chance that it's will help us to preserve
Something to work
different
towards.
dialects and not them forgotten. But yeah.